I want to thank everyone for taking the time today and joining us for the listening and information session on the Property Acquisition Redevelopment Fund from the NJEDA. I am Caitlin Giles McCormick here with the EDA. What I'm going to do is actually switch things over to NJEDA's Executive Vice President of Real Estate Development and Programs, Dan Jennings, to say a few words. Dan?
Thank you, Caitlin. I want to thank Caitlin and our events team and our outreach team for organizing this event. Welcome, everyone. So most of us have encountered situations where one or more vacant, underutilized properties are preventing important projects from happening in our communities. I've had the privilege of sitting where a lot of you are, working for a municipality, working for a community development organization, working for a redevelopment organization. We find it could be the case of a property owner who is not interested or unwilling to redevelop that property. We could encounter a case where you have adjoining properties with different owners. And because those properties don't have a common owner, an impactful project cannot proceed. We believe in certain cases, it makes sense for a municipality, local redevelopment agency, or nonprofit organization to acquire and/or assemble projects to enable projects that are key to your local development strategy to proceed. Hence, we are creating this Property Acquisition Fund. We understand in some cases, some of you may be looking to actively develop property you acquire, and in other cases, you may be looking to partner or designate a redeveloper for properties that would be required or be acquired. In a brief moment, I'm going to turn this presentation over to my colleague, Liza Nolan, our Director of Real Estate Programs, to explain the program and the parameters that we have in mind. I should take this opportunity to also point out we have other members of our real estate team on the call. George Santos, our Chief Real Estate Officer. Also, we have a new member of our team, Giancarlo Di Leonardo, who is our Senior Program Officer. We want to use this session to solicit your feedback on our parameters. So please use this session to give us ideas and pose questions. We can't guarantee that we will answer all your questions and comments today, but we will respond as soon as we can. We're looking to launch this program later this year, or early next year, so we do have enough time to address issues that will arise from today's session. Also, keep in mind that we do have other tools and programs to encourage redevelopment in your communities, and we will briefly mention them at the end of the presentation. At this time, let me turn this presentation over to Liza Nolan. Thank you.
Okay, so to start, this is a new pilot program that EDA is establishing for property acquisition and the redevelopment. It's a $25 million fund that we are establishing. It comes from the state fiscal year 2023 state budget appropriation. And we'll be providing funding. We'll talk about the eligible applicants that will be involved and some of the requirements for the program. The funding that we would provide through this fund would be for the property acquisition and related closing costs to acquire that property. The proposals that would be submitted would ask for funding for that property acquisition, but would have a plan for the future development or redevelopment of the property or properties that are being required, and would outline that time frame for that redevelopment. Some of the future uses that we would be anticipating might include a mixed use or transit-oriented development, commercial or manufacturing projects. This program would not be for land banking, and we would not allow for a primary use end use of the future development to be for a government building or government use, nor for industrial or warehouse. EDA does not typically fund 100% residential. This is a state budget appropriation. This is not a state legislative program. And we would not be funding the future use for 100% retail. The budget is the 25 million that we mentioned. As far as the initial parameters that we are setting up as part of the program, and we are soliciting input from today and during the next bit of time, this would be a grant to the applicants. However, because the intent of this is not just to acquire property and land bank, but to actually lead to future development and redevelopment that would promote and be consistent with local, county, or other economic development plans and priorities, we anticipate putting a deed restriction on related to that future project occurring within a time period. And if that were not to happen, the deed restriction would have some recapture provisions. Typically EDA, when we have funding available, we have a maximum funding amount. We're targeting perhaps a maximum of 8 million per project. Again, we'll consider feedback on that during this discussion and after. This program would fund up to 80% of the project property acquisition funding cost, and the applicants would then be providing 20% or a minimum of 20%, kind of like a match. Typically, EDA programs, and some of you I know have been able to access those and use those funding programs in the past. Typically, our application fee is $1,000 per application. The applicants in this program, and Dan mentioned this at the beginning, our pool of applicants are targeted to the governmental applicants such as municipalities, counties, regional entities that might include redevelopment or improvement authorities, and not-for-profit local community and economic development entities. Whenever EDA works with applicants, we do have requirements such as must be in good standing with the state as far as tax clearance, Department of Labor, and/or Department of Environmental Protection. So we do run those checks and make sure that the applicants would be eligible to receive our funds. We anticipate this as an online application, competitive application round. We do, and in recent years have greatly improved and streamlined our common application. We have on our website, once we launch a program, an application portal by which applicants can fill out the application, standard questions, standard information that we gather, and then we input and ask questions, or the applicant provides documentation and uploads responding to the particulars of the program. So in this case, we would ask information related to the property acquisition, the budget costs involved in that, what the description and the plan for the future redevelopment, future development of the property would be, and then about the timelines for both the acquisition and the future development that is being proposed. Application, we're anticipating it would be open for approximately 90 days. I'll go through a little bit more of the timeline, but as we're gathering information here, then we would have some time before we actually launch a program that I'll explain. We already, by the number of attendees and people who have signed up for this seminar today, we have seen a lot of interest in this potential pilot program. So we would structure this as a competitive scoring process. When we do that, EDA staff forms an evaluation committee. In the application, we outline the documents that are required and what the scoring parameters would be. And then we undertake a review and evaluation of those proposals that are submitted and go from the highest eligible application scored and provide the funding from the top down. Once we review the applications, and especially because we anticipate the funding amounts would be of a significant size for the property acquisition costs, each project that we would be funding or wanting to approve would be presented to the NJEDA board for the actual funding approval. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the steps involved in that process. So here we are today in July. We're gathering as much input and comments from the group here today, hopefully using the chat button here, as well as we'll provide information by which you can submit more detailed questions during into an email box, and then we can respond to them that way. In September or fall, we would be taking this program structure to our board for review and approval. What that means is we outline the parameters and specific requirements of the program, the funding amounts, the timeline for applications, what would be required for an application, how we would score, what percentage of the scoring would be for certain parts of the application, such as the proposal concepts, the readiness to proceed, timelines, and other parameters, and we would outline that now. Today, we do not have those details to be discussed because we are more so focused on getting input on the concepts and the structure of the program. Then in December-ish, perhaps we would plan to launch the program. Once the board approves the program, and we have developed our product specifications, we go to develop the application. As I mentioned, it would be an online application. It would be open for at least 90 days. Once applications are received, EDA staff undertakes a completeness review to make sure the documentation is submitted. We do allow applicants typically a 10-day cure period to provide or answer a question that might have been missed. And then, as I mentioned, we undertake an evaluation and scoring based on a staff review. Following that, the board would review and approve for based on the staff recommendations following the scoring for each project. Once that occurs, we would have a grant agreement with each successful applicant, which would be based on what their proposal was and how they were scored, as to what property they would be acquiring or properties, the funding amount that we would be providing as a grant, and what the future project proposal is, and the timelines that were mentioned in the proposal and which were scored. During that, we would have a funding disbursement and then monitor just to make sure that the requirements of the grant agreement are being met by the applicant. That process that I've outlined here is the typical way in which EDA has done programs most recently, and so we would try to follow that general process and steps. That's the overview of the program as we are structuring it now, and what we'd like to do is have a few quick response questions just to get some key information, and then we'll go into a little bit more targeted discussion, perhaps on some of the points. So Caitlin, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Yep. So everybody should be have a poll that's popping up on your screen. You can take a few moments to let us know if you are interested in applying, and some information about your timelines.
Yeah, so the first question deals with the property acquisition. If you're interested, all of the responses, by the way, will be confidential. It'll just give us some information as to how people are viewing this now. We're also trying to ask about what might be a reasonable timeline once we provide the grant agreement to the successful applicants for an acquisition of the property to occur. And then following that, the timeline for the actual future redevelopment of the property. Again, this program funding would be able to provide acquisition and related costs. This program would not be utilized for the future redevelopment of the property or properties. As you know, and we'll mention at different times, EDA does have a range of other programs, some of which might be applicable depending on what the proposed future redevelopment of the site or sites might be.
So I'm going to do a last call. We've got pretty good responses. I am going to go ahead and end the poll real quick. And you can continue with the presentation.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for sharing that. We do expect a lot of interest in this program. And now what we'd like to do is either through the chat, which would be the best way if you have questions and we can monitor that. We'll look at that first, but gathering some information. I'm trying to, the poll is still showing on mine. Okay, hold on, let me just.
Yeah, you should be able to just close it out, Liza, and if you click back on your.
Yep, okay,
Yeah, there
just took
go.
2 clicks there, wasn't on top of that, sorry. What we'd like to get a sense of and have input on is if you're thinking of, when you heard about this program and the possibility for this type of funding, if you're aware of the types of properties that might be of interest to you to acquire, and what challenges or concerns, especially for those on the line, and we know there are several governmental applicants, municipalities or authorities that might be interested in this program. What are some of the things that you see as we outline the parameters that we're thinking of that you would want more information on or might be a concern for you moving forward? Oftentimes we set up minimum or maximum funding amounts. We do have 25 million available for this fund. We have put in there as a tentative that the maximum funding amount might be $8 million per project. And then also any thoughts on the 80% funding and the 20% match that we are proposing. So if people have questions, we can look at the chat. And then we can also see if we can take other questions.
And everybody should have the ability to utilize their chat feature now. I don't see anything coming in quite yet through the chat, but now that we've gotten some clear questions in the Q&A.
So I see one question about, can funds be used to acquire land for creation of green space or other public space associated with a private development? Our plan was that the property acquisition would not be the primary use would not be for a public purpose, as there might be other means by which that acquisition could occur. But we will make note of that comment and start to aggregate and rethink through some of the parameters. I'm seeing a question about a project for all tiny houses. Is that what that is? EDA in this program, because this is not a legislative program with legislative rules, EDA does not fund 100% residential only projects. So I don't know if that answers specifically because I may not have seen the full question. Caitlin, if you see other questions. are awardees of the ETA Distressed Asset Planning Grant eligible to apply? As long as you're a governmental entity as outlined, or a nonprofit, community economic development entity, those are the applicants that we are targeting for this new pilot program. So I think the answer to that is yes.
Got a couple questions in regarding to the 20% match. Does it have to be cash equity, or can it be another source of funding? A specific one is asking about NRTC funds being utilized for the 20% match. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. Our thought would be that we would fund 80%, and the matches, such as the NRTC, the Neighborhood Revitalization Tax Credit Program that is being referred to, that would be an acceptable match from our end. And so and the cash equity, if it was other funding is, I think, what they meant. Does it just have to be cash, or could it be another funding or loan or program? Typically, we would consider that, yes, as a match or as meeting the full funding that would be needed to acquire the property.
Can you speak a little bit about areas in need of redevelopment? Do they have any role in this program as of yet? Is it a designation that is needed for the program?
Guessing that might have come from a municipality, but I don't want to read into any of that. So if there was an area in need of redevelopment and a redevelopment plan, and through such a planning effort, there might have been property or properties that were identified as in need of redevelopment, and therefore might want to be acquired. Someone might, the governmental entity perhaps, or other, might want to acquire them as part of that. That would be an eligible use, and that is something that we have considered might fit well within this new program that we're standing up.
And you spoke earlier in regards to how it may be multiple properties that may not be owned by the same property owner. Is this something that then would the multiple properties owners would submit one application, or would it be multiple applications?
So to answer that, the applicant to receive our funds and to apply for our funds would be the governmental entity or the nonprofit. If one of those applicants was trying to aggregate a number of properties, perhaps, I'm just throwing out an idea that there might be a number of properties in a city that are partially vacant, or housing that needs to be rehabbed, and they were going to aggregate them for a future development project, they would submit one application. If it was something more, I don't know if there would be a scenario where there would be some scattered site that wasn't really one project that would meet the goals of this program. But I wouldn't say no, but I more so anticipate that you would submit one application with all of the sites as a combined proposal for the acquisition, and then the planning or the proposal for the future redevelopment of the properties.
And I know here at the EDA, we've got lots of different programs out there, and sometimes we like to talk about stacking. So utilizing multiple programs to help fund a project. Are you aware of any conflicts in regards to awardees of the Distressed Asset Planning Grant being also able to apply for this fund, or can you speak at all to how you might be able to pair this with other EDA programs?
Sure. So that, and I think I recall the details of that program, but Dan, if I don't answer it correctly, please elaborate. That was a planning grant program to be able to identify and work towards the planning and future redevelopment of stranded assets or distressed assets. So my sense is that was the planning element of it. And so now to move towards acquiring that, this program would possibly be a nice next step for that. And then the other question related to other programs that EDA might have, and we'll touch on some of those as part of this, but yes, you would be able to utilize other EDA funding programs for the future redevelopment of it without jeopardizing the acquisition funding that you might receive from this program.
Yeah. Hey, Liza, we're getting a lot of questions. So let me take this opportunity to address a couple of them. So someone asked if using this fund would trigger prevailing wage for the construction. So the answer is largely I'm going to say yes. What we need to check into is if the grant was somehow repaid to EDA and a project moved forward, would prevailing wage still be required? So we still need to just check more generally on the prevailing wage trigger. But that's one of the questions that we will clarify, in a follow-up response.
Were there any other that stuck out to you, Dan? Because I've got more that I can feed to Liza.
Yeah. We hadn't thought about having special improvement districts be eligible, but what I would suggest is whoever posed that question, get in touch with us and let's chat about the type of project you have in mind. So we hadn't. Someone asked the question, are economic development organizations eligible? I would think the answer to that one is yes. Yeah, someone's asking an interesting question here about so we know in some cases a municipality may want to acquire the property, but then want to ultimately dispose of that property or designate a redeveloper to buy that property. So we recognize those situations. Right now, because of the way EDA is structured, because of some of the rules we have in place, it's much more feasible for us to transfer property or award property to a municipality, or say give a grant to a municipality, as opposed to giving it to the private developer. But again, I would encourage whoever posed the question to talk to us so that we can better understand your situation.
Had a couple questions coming in regards to scoring the application, since this is a competitive program, and specifically around underserved communities or diverse businesses and things like that. Liza, do you have any guidelines on that you can share?
Sure, it will be. We are anticipating this would be a competitively scored application process. We have not set out the specific parameters around that. There would be some elements of scoring related to the ability for the acquisition, the funding that is, or the costs related to the project, but most likely it would be for the points towards the future redevelopment proposal and what that would be planned for, including what type of development, the location of the property. So that might be towards location as far as in opportunity zones or government restricted municipalities. We haven't thought through those specific scoring percentages or criteria. We'd also be looking at the timeline for the proposals and the purchase and the planned redevelopment of it. So yes, stay tuned, and we would be providing that as we develop the website. I think as we mentioned earlier, this webinar and the other information as we begin to develop the program would have its own page as far as the details of this, and then we will also start to aggregate all the questions that we are receiving as we put the program and specifications together.
Right, wonderful. I think this is a particularly interesting one in regards to the $25 million available total for the program, and with an individual project cap of 8 million, that potentially could just be a couple programs, a couple projects funded. So is there any consideration in regards to smaller programs, or thoughts in terms of how that $25 million will be distributed?
Dan, do you want to respond, or should I?
Sure. So I think, so first of all, that's a good question. I think we would probably not want to see the money split on just large awards, right? So, but first of all, the question's very good. I think we're going to have to think through whether maybe we limit the number of large awards versus smaller awards. So thank you for the question, and we will brainstorm more on that question internally.
Yeah, since scoring is still being developed, that could be a factor for sure.
I saw a question of would a public parking deck be eligible? And we were not anticipating that as an eligible use. And then they also asked, what if it was part of a mixed use project? And so that would be a consideration. Again, this program would fund the acquisition of the properties, but then the future use as a mixed use development would be something that we would typically consider. But a standalone parking garage, we were not anticipating that as a standalone future project use. Someone also asked about procurement, and I think if it's a governmental entity, they would have to follow their process, or whether it's a procurement process or a city council resolution process for the acquisition and identification of any sites that they would want to acquire, but it doesn't impact this program from the EDA side. Is there a minimum grant amount that we would allow? We are throwing that out for a question consideration. We have on some of our programs, we do have a minimum and a maximum that we would fund. On this program, we are still considering that. So again, if you want to provide more specifics, providing information to realestateInfo@njeda.gov, we can take all of those questions and respond to them in the future and as part of this process of putting together the program.
Also, I see a couple of questions regarding eminent domain. So we have given some thought to that. I can tell you that we're scared of eminent domain as an agency, just given how the courts are acting these days. But we understand that sometimes it may be the only path for municipalities to gain control of an important redevelopment site. I think our concern still stands, though. If you plan on applying, you need to pursue eminent domain. We're concerned about how long that process will take, versus a scenario in which you're maybe you're doing eminent domain already, and you may need funding to resolve the eminent domain situation. In other words, to settle it. I think the settlement part feels a little more viable to us. But again, we're happy to brainstorm it further, talk about it. But again, we just don't want to, we want to avoid situations where the outcome and the time frame is unknown. I think it's safe to say that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So projects and applicants will need to have municipal support, whether it's the municipality who's applying or otherwise. Is there any prohibition on a municipality supporting multiple projects, like in separate areas that may not be like contiguous? I see what the
question is. So can I guess, Liza, they're asking if we'll entertain like 2 applications from the same municipalities. Is maybe that's another way to two or more applications? Is that another way to interpret the question?
I think so.
Okay.
My sense would be yes.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
would do
Yeah.
that. Yep. And then I saw a couple other questions here. Sorry. Again, this program is under development right now, so we do not have a full web page and website up. We do not have an application available yet. The good thing about this program is you're hearing about it somewhat firsthand today. It will be developed in the next few months, and then once the board approves it, at that point, the product specifications, the specific criteria for applying for what would be included in the application and how it would be scored would be known publicly, and then the application would be developed. So you would have time during that period to be thinking of this moving forward. And then once the application goes live and the portal is open for the applications, you would have typically 3 months to be able to actually submit the application. But once the board approves it, most of the criteria for the application are known publicly at that time. It just is not available to apply immediately.
Additionally, Liza, is it all right if we open things up if people want to verbally ask questions? We do have a hand raised, so basically the way folks would do that is if you can find that raise hand option on your Zoom controls, you can do that, and I can give you permission to speak.
Sure. Thank you, Caitlin.
We do have Ralph, and if you can please identify yourself and just understand that we've got about 20 minutes left on the session. We want to make sure we hear from everybody. We probably have some more we can get to in the chat as well. So just be aware of, you know, the high volume of folks on the line today. And we will do first come, first serve. I am going to start with Ralph. You should be able to unmute yourself, Ralph.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you very much. This is Ralph Blakesley from the Borough of Netcon in Morris County. We have a downtown that is in need of parking, and my question wasn't the one related to the parking deck. We have 2 vacant lots that are right next to our downtown, and we have been thinking about approaching the owner and purchasing them and putting in off-street parking for that would support our shops. Would this program be something that might be able to fund the acquisition of those lots?
So, Ralph, thank you for your question. We honestly had not thought about supporting our parking project in and of itself. So I don't want to give you a fine answer. Yeah. I want to brainstorm it internally because, again, some of the scenarios that you and others are posing are important. There's no doubt they're important to your situation, your municipality. So it's just not a scenario that we had contemplated. George, you want to answer that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dan. I think that's right. As we start to, as we continue to figure out how we want to prioritize these projects, this will be a competitive program. In general, our mission is to create jobs throughout the state. Pure parking would support potentially jobs and retail activity in your downtown, but is not job activity directly. So there's a threshold question of whether or not we would make it eligible for the program. But if we were, I wouldn't imagine it would score very well if we were to compare it with other projects. But as we develop the program, we'll think it through and we'll make sure to let folks know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, now we've got Alex. Alex, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for your time, NJEDA. Appreciate this. This has been very informative. I have a pretty simple question. We have an area in need of redevelopment it's designated in our transit area. By the way, I'm from the city of London, I apologize. And make a long story short, there's about 10 private property owners. This developer has pretty much purchased a little over half the properties. The only problem is there's one property owner that is holding out because he thinks he hit the lottery because it's a quarter-mile away from the train station and the city is growing rapidly. We did an appraisal for the property at 1.5 million, probably a little bit before the pandemic. This private property owner is telling this designated developer that he wants 3 million now. In this particular situation, what would you guys, I mean, if this is approved, would you guys be willing to make up that ground, or what is the process? Do you do an appraisal for the property? How does it work essentially?
I think I'm gonna jump in here.
Sure.
We would have to do an appraisal because, you know, we are wary of over enriching certain property owners by coming in and folks saying that, you know, my property is actually worth, you know, 3 million, 5 million, 6 million, and an appraisal says it's worth 1. We can't just write a blank check. I'm sorry, Liza, it looked like you were going to speak though. Do you have a? Okay.
No, I would say that. Yep.
Yeah, so there would have to be an appraisal as part of it, because, you know, we there's a question of whether or not we could pay maybe a little bit more than what an appraisal would be, and generally fair market value, just to, you know, in these kinds of cases to make sure deals get done. But we certainly wouldn't be able to do like twice what an appraisal is. But we could maybe look at discuss internally what kind of wiggle room we have around an appraised amount.
Yeah, and to add to that, George, I think what also might be helpful here is, let's say the appraisal comes in at, I don't know, like 2.5 million, and the owner's asking for 3. If there's a match requirement and maybe the city is willing to come up with the difference of $500,000, could we allow it? It's a scenario we can think through.
Yeah, it's a good question. We'll think it through, because there are certainly those types of instances where folks are holding out. We want to make sure projects get done, but we also have to, you know, be good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars here. So,
of course, thank you guys.
Thank you.
All right, we can move on to Clint Walden. You should be able to unmute. Clint, you will have to unmute on your end. We may have lost Clint. All right, I'm going to move over to Elizabeth now. Elizabeth, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Elizabeth Taranik with Chelsea Economic Development Corporation in Atlantic City. Thank you, EDA, for having this program. It's a great grant program for what we have a lot of, which is vacant mixed-use buildings in our commercial districts that are just really a drain and they don't pencil out. So just running through a scenario, if we were to apply for the funds, we would get 80% for the acquisition. We would use another source of funds to rehab the property, and then we'd like to sell the property to an owner occupier who at least would inhabit the, you know, the residential portion, and maybe either also have a store front or rent that space out. So with the deed restriction, whatever we had anticipated, do we have to be specific on what the use will be there, or can it just be a commercial use that's permitted in the neighborhood commercial districts, and then the recapture money comes if it's like, what would happen there?
So I think we put in the recapture, or we're thinking about the recapture provision, if in situations where like the promise to move forward with a project is not kept. Like,
Gotcha. Okay.
Right.
Mhm.
Secondly is we're not asking you to identify, you know, what the exact use would be, as much as to say, if it's a commercial use and it's mixed use, yeah, I think if the zoning allows it, the redevelopment plan calls for it, and that's the intention, I don't think we would necessarily need to know, you know, the name of the business or that's going into it. I think, by the way, thank you for bringing up this scenario, because, you know, sometimes, you know, a couple of mixed use properties can make a difference, you know, in a particular situation. And, you know, we have begun thinking about, are there some smaller scenarios that, or smaller projects that we should support in addition to some bigger projects. So, So again, you've given us a couple of good things to think about. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're going to go over to Michelle. Michelle?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Nichelle Pace. I am one of the board directors for the Camden Business Association. A question that I had for you is, can you just clarify if you're already working on a project that's with one of the EDA planning grants, if can people that have already acquired their sites by the end of the year still apply?
So you've acquired the property?
No, but that part of the process has started to have discussions and draft LOIs. So it'll be some months now, but if it doesn't, if it happens prior to this piece coming out, because we just wanted to get a jump on the project here in the city of Camden, can you still apply if site acquisition already happened?
And
yeah, to be honest with you, I don't know. I mean, there's arguments for and against it, and I
For sure.
But it sounds like you have what you need in place to make it happen. So my question is, why would you not? Yeah, why would you not?
I mean, I think to jump in, if you have acquired the site and you have closed on the site, we're not going to retroactively fund
No,
a past
that's
purchase.
not the case. We're so far
Okay.
from that. We're trying to figure
Okay.
out how to acquire the site is my whole point of this.
Okay,
Like,
yeah,
yes, we have
if-
some
if-
draft things in place, but
Yeah.
we're still trying to figure out how to raise the capital to acquire the site.
Okay. Now,
And
also,
if that happened in, say, November, we're like, okay, we now have the capital, but the application comes in April, where we have enough for the deposit or only a portion of it. That's what I'm trying to get to, because we really don't know if we're even going to be able to acquire the site prior to the application coming out.
Yeah. Okay. Everyone, because we're going to take the last couple of minutes just to mention a couple other programs, because what we're hoping, just like some of you may leverage the planning grants you received and now are ready to acquire the site, we understand once you acquire the site, you may need funding to do the project that will go on the site. So we definitely want to take the last couple of minutes and just, give you just a rundown of those programs.
Dan, is my screen still sharing? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you want to run through them, Dan?
Okay. So, so the main tool we have to support financing gaps for larger residential mixed-use commercial project is the Aspire program. We've made a number of there's been a number of recent legislative enhancements to dramatically improve the program. Award caps have gone up. Other restrictions have been lifted. So we would hope some of you would take advantage of this program and ultimately do a project that could take advantage of Aspire. We're also, I think, beginning to accept applications for Brownfield Redevelopment Incentive Tax Credit Program. The person who runs that program, I can connect you to that person if you have a brownfield site and you're looking to remediate the site. So the person who runs that program, Elizabeth Runenbrick, would be happy to follow up with any of you if you have a question. The third one is the Construction Inflation Fund, which is a program we're hoping to launch in August. This is modeled after a similar program that HMFA introduced. So if you've been working on a prevailing wage project, but that project has experienced cost increases, and of course the project has to be mixed use or commercial in nature, but you haven't been able to figure out a way to totally finance the project because of cost increases due to that you can attribute to the pandemic, then you want to check out this fund, the Construction Inflation Fund. So definitely, if you have questions about that, you can ask Liza and or myself. The Film Digital Media Studio Infrastructure Program is actually live. We're taking applications. I think the application due date is August 16th. So if there is a film studio project in your municipality and there are infrastructure needs related to that project, you definitely want to check out this program. So again, don't want to go too much into it, but it's a great program if you have a film digital media studio project. Historic Property Reinvestment Program. So most of you know there's federal historic tax credits for renovation or rehab of historic properties. This is essentially a state version of that. We're open for business. I think we currently don't have an application round, but if you have a historic property and you're looking for funding, there may be a chance to not only use this program, but to pair it with other programs we have. I'm going to jump a little bit because I don't know too much about the amusement park grant program. The Stranded Assets Repossessioning Investment Policy. So we know that there's a growing number of stranded assets around the state, regardless of whether they're in a rural area, or urban area. We're talking about vacant office parks, mill buildings, retail malls, churches. So we're looking for assets that have at least 50,000 square feet that have to be reused in order to have a future. And EDA is looking to make investments in those assets. So when we say investments, we're talking about working with the property owner to redevelop the property, but using our funds to help with the economics of the repositioning. So Liza runs that program. I'm going to ask you to talk. There's actually a website for the program. So you should check out the website. We ask for some information. Fill out the information if you have a stranded asset that you're looking to reposition or you know of one, and we'd be happy to follow up with you. So we have a lot of tools in the toolkit. We know that there's a need for all of them, and we definitely look forward to working with you.
Yes, and as Dan mentioned, for any of the programs, you can go to our website at njeda.gov, and financing incentives or other programs, you will find the details of the ones we mentioned here as well as others. And then for following up on this, again, this will have the information from this session and the chat questions, but other questions can be sent to us at the email address listed here, realestateinfo@njeda.com. And I think that's a good summary at this point, unless there were any last quick questions that in the chat that we can address quickly.
Yeah.
Caitlin or?
Yeah, I think folks should be emailing if they had a question that was not covered, and also with the understanding that we'll have a lot more information coming out soon. I think we can end if everybody's good with that.
Okay, great. Thank you all for participating in this. We're excited that there is a lot of interest in this new pilot program, and we look forward to incorporating the comments and some of the guidance you have provided to us in responding to our questions, as well as the questions that we'll see forthcoming. So thank you.